We're going to take a break for a few videos from React Redux and just focus on Redux. Redux itself is fairly simple. And by simple, I don't mean just easy. I mean, there's just not too many pieces to the core of Redux itself. And so what I want to do is spend a few videos exploring those. It's helpful, especially when you have time, to go back and look at your tools that you're using to see how they actually work inside, which is easy for us to do since this is open source. It's also easy because it is a small amount of code. And so I've taken the liberty for this video to go ahead and start an application so I don't have to build the whole thing from scratch. Let's take a look at it real quick. Now there's the terminal. Here's the app. Right now it has just this counter number 1. This is a component. I'm using React Router, and that's how I'm doing my switching here. And so the React Router bits, it looks something like this right here. I've installed React Router DOM. I brought in browser router, route and link. And here, browser router with links to a root page which will have no component, a counter 1 component which we will build this video, a counter 2 component which we will build in the next video, and finally just right now a route to this counter 1, and next video we'll create the route for counter 2. If you would like a refresher on React Router DOM, just go and check on I have another video series on React and I cover some things there. We won't be going over it this time really, though it is relevant. As you will see, it is relevant. So what are we going to do? Today, or at least in this video, regardless of time, we are going to look at how Redux works outside of React Redux. What we've been doing has used half of Redux in its raw form. This time, we're going to use all of Redux in its raw form. And so the store stuff that we did before is very similar. You will see some things though that are different. And so this will hopefully help you understand how Redux itself works and some of what React Redux does for you. So that's the goal. This is an exploration in how things are really working. Okay, so the idea is I'm going to create 2 counters. This first counter is going to be built with Redux. The next counter, which we'll do in the next video, is we're going to build our own version of Redux with one eye on the source code of Redux, reading through it, seeing how it works, and then rebuilding it as a learning experiment. But this time we're going to use it as is. And so I'm going to go to here and npm install Redux. Notice I'm not installing React Redux. Just Redux this time. Okay, we should be up and ready to go. Okay, well let's begin like before by creating our store. So I'm going to go into the source folder and create a folder called Redux. And I'm going to call it this because next time I'll have a folder called whatever we're going to call it next time. And so here's Redux, and I'm going to create an index.js file. And here's where we're going to define our store. So let's start filling in some of those pieces. First piece is we're going to create some initial state. There we go. There's some initial state. Let's create a reducer. A reducer is just a pure function. We are going to pass in a state as the first argument, but start it off with initial state as so. We'll see in the next video how it is that this is actually called and set with the initial undefined state, so we get this default. You'll see that in the next video. We'll peek behind the covers. And so state and then an action like so. So console log reducer and then the action. Return the state. So right now, no state changes. And let's create a store from this. Const store equals create store. And this is what we'll be building in the next video, is create store. And so we pass in the reducer and export default store. Now, we're going to get an error at this point if we were to use this, because where does create store come from? Well, good question. That comes from Redux. Okay, so we have a store with an initial state, a reducer, and well, create store function with initial state, a reducer. Then we create the store with the reducer, and then we export it. Okay. Now, if you're not using React Redux, that means you don't have a provider. Let's go to our counter, and let's import the store from Redux. Now, note, this is not the installed Redux. This is my Redux. So let's see what we get. Open this up. What is this? It is an object. It's actually the store that was created. That is, after all, what I exported. Let's keep that open. Okay. And so the reducer was fired once with the init. We've seen this before. The first time the store is initialized, it's created, it fires this Redux init action, and this is actually the thing that puts that initial state, as you'll see in the next video, puts that initial state in the actual state. And this is the store that was created. Notice there's some functions here. We are going to use dispatch, get state, and subscribe in this video. And in the next video, we will implement those ourselves. So let's see. Where do we need to go? Well, we've imported the store. What we need to do is we need to, whenever this counter comes onto the page, what we need to do is we need to get the state from the store and populate the counter. So how does that work? Well, let's create a constructor. And let's set this.state equal to something. You know, if you've set default state before, you might be used to this. If you see this get state function, well, you know what we can do is we can do this. We can say store.getState, and that actually gets the current state of the store. So that's pretty handy. Count. And so in theory then, I will be able to get to this.state.count. In theory. Okay, there's the 0. Well, that is what I had in my initial state. Let's bump that up to 5. And see, that flows down. Okay, so let's review where we are right now. So instead of using React Redux, what we've done in our counter is we've grabbed the store that we created directly. We didn't pass it in here. We're just grabbing it directly and using it. The first function we run into is this get state function, because this get state will actually get us the state of what's in the store. Now, the state that's in the store is this initial state, and it is actually there because of this reducer that's run right there. So we get state, and there it is in the store. So now let's change the state. That would be fairly important. So let's create a button. Can't type. There we go. And what I want to do is I want to handle click and say, let's see, well, I need to create an action whenever click happens. So const action equals type increment. That's the action we want to do. And there we go. And we need to dispatch it. How do we dispatch it? Well, you know what? I wish I would have left that console log there. Let's go back and get it. So if we look and open this up, hey, we should do that. Anyway, if we go and open this up, we'll see some functions, and hey, there's dispatch. Remember that dispatch function that came in from map dispatch to props? There we go, dispatch function. That comes directly from Redux itself, from the store. So let's see. Let's say store.dispatch, and you know what? It acts just like the other one, where you can just pass in the action, and then you're done. That's pretty cool. Oh, and we should hook this up, because if we don't hook it up, it's not going to do us much good. And so if I hit this, we can see that the reducer is getting the increment action. So let's go look at our reducer. Well, we're not handling it yet, so let's go ahead and create a switch for this. So switch.action type, and let's see, let's have a case for increment. And so we'll return object.assign, and then the state, and then the count is going to be state.count plus 1. And before we get that error that we are probably at this point very used to, at least if you've been watching the videos, let's just go ahead and set that default. Okay, so here we go. All right, I'm firing it. Now, in theory, the store is updating. Now, this count is clearly not updating, but in theory, the store is updating. So let's go look at our Redux tools, and it's going to give us this message that says, hey, you're not doing things right. Go look at the instructions. So let's go look at the instructions. And if you've done this before, you know, it's actually really easy to set up these Redux tools. All we need to do is go in here and find this line right there. Okay. And let's see, go back to our app. Now, when we go to our store where it was created, we just pass this in as the second argument. And now we have our Redux tab tool thing. So let's increment this a few times. So if we look at the state, hey, that actually works. And so we can see that the increment is happening. But our component is not being updated. This is actually where I wanted to get in terms of the point of this exercise. The other things that we've seen have all been things we've seen before in terms of creating a store, dispatching actions. So all that's review. What we're about to do is all new. And so this is something that React Redux does for you. And so essentially what's happening is the store is subscribing to any changes, excuse me, not the store. The Redux app here, the Redux plugin, is subscribing to any changes in the store. So anytime an action is fired, it sees those. Now, and it sees those state changes and all that stuff. However, our component is not subscribing. So how do you subscribe to changes? Whenever you change the store, how does a component know that it should change? Well, if you're just using straight up Redux, we have to manually subscribe to the store. It is fortunately easy to do. I'm going to create a component did mount function. So this is the lifecycle function that will fire after a component is mounted. I am going to do this. I'm going to say store.subscribe. So this is, hey, let's look at it in console. If we look at the store subscribe, see, that's one of those functions. So what you do is you call subscribe and you pass in a function. And we're going to use an arrow function so that this inside the function is the right thing. So pass this in, no pun intended. Pass that function in and say this dot set state. And so I'm going to say store dot get state. Now what in the world is all this? So let's talk about it. So what we're doing is when the component is mounted, what I'm saying is, okay, store, I want to know anytime you change. In other words, I'm going to subscribe. So I'm going to subscribe to all of your changes. And the way that I will know that you're changing is I'm going to give you a function. And you just call this function whenever the store changes. Okay, so that's what the subscribe function does. So the thing I pass in is a function that says, okay, this dot set state, and get the state from the store. Okay, and so we're used to seeing set state as something like if we were to manually do this, let's say on the handle click, and we weren't doing an action, we would do something like this dot set state, and we would say count is this dot count plus 1, right? So that's what we would do if we were doing state without Redux. If you're doing state with Redux, then we just need to get the state from the store, and that's what this is. So we're going to set the state and give it that object from the store, and it will update it. That's basically the idea. So let's try it. Hey, look at that. Our component is updating. That's pretty great. Now, we might think we're done, because it, from this standpoint, looks like everything's just groovy, because, hey, we created a store, we're dispatching actions, and now we know when changes happen, so therefore the component updates. It's pretty groovy. But watch this. I'm going to go to the root. Then I'm going to go back to counter. And then, hey, it all looks good. Still count 15. Then I'm going to increment. And oh golly, something bad happened. Warning. Set state can only update a mounted or mounting component. This usually means you called set state on an unmounted component. This is a no-op. Please check the code for the counter one component. Okay. All right, so let's actually go through some of this backwards. Please check the code for the counter one component. Well, that is where I use the store, so that's a good place to go. This thing is a no-op. What this means is a no operation, which means even though I'm doing something bad, it's not having major side effects. It just, nothing, at least visually, happens. It's still bad though, because it's tiny bits of CPU. It actually also points to the fact that a component which should have been destroyed out of memory is not destroyed out of memory. That's actually, I think, our biggest problem. So this usually means set state. That usually means you called set state on an unmounted component. How did that happen? Well, if I look through here and I do a search for set state, I will see that it only occurs in one place. And that is right here in the subscribe function, where I say, okay, whenever you change, then I'm going to call set state. Notice how I did this before, how I created this error. I went away, let's clear it, root, come back. I went away and then came back and then incremented. Okay, this time I got 2 of the warnings. If I go back and come here and do it, I get 3 back here, 4, and as I do these, it stays at 4. This number goes away, this number goes up every time I go away. It goes up by 1. And then when I come back, I'm getting that number of warnings. Why? Well, whenever I subscribe this way, this right here is capturing that component and not letting it get destroyed in memory. And so therefore, it sticks around. And so that means whenever I hit increment, it's not actually calling set state on one counter component. It's actually counting it, it's calling set state on the counter component that's showing in 4 others that are still in memory. That's bad. Fortunately, it's easy to solve this. And so whenever you call subscribe, you get a function out of it, actually. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this.unsub. And what I need to do is when this component is about to leave, so component did mount is when the component comes on. When the component leaves, as in component will unmount, what I need to do is I need to just call that function, like so. So increment a bunch of times. go away, come back, increment. Yes. All right, we've successfully subscribed and unsubscribed from any notifications from the Redux store. Okay, so that's the basics of using Redux apart from React Redux. Let me review. In the index.js, to use Redux this way, we didn't have to make a single different type of thing. Everything works the way it used to. Nothing new here. All that's new is around how the component gets its state, like so, and how it keeps its state up to date. It moves to a subscription-based or an event-based model where the component will subscribe, will need to know whenever the store changes. It's sort of like this. If you want to get weather alerts and you don't want to constantly be checking Weather Channel or something like that, maybe you can subscribe, and if there's a bad alert, they'll send you a text or they'll send you a push notification. That's the basic idea there. If you want to know whenever your children get home from being out of town, what you do is you say, okay, kids, whenever you get home, give me a call. And so that way, when they get home, they give you a call. That's subscribing to an event where they will call you, hopefully, they will call you. It's the same basic idea. With subscribing, we're not constantly asking, are you home yet? Are you home yet? Are you home yet? Or, if we're going with a Weather Channel analogy, is there a storm? Is there a storm? Is there a storm? We're not doing that. What we're doing is we're saying, okay, when there is a storm, call that function. And that way, we'll know. Same thing here. When there is a change, you just let us know. And also, it gives us an unsub function, an unsubscribe function. And so we can just keep this, and whenever we unmount the component, which totally happens whenever you leave a route like this, it will call component, will unmount and unmount the component. When we want to unmount the component, we want to call unsubscribe. So that way, the store will now forget about us. Okay, so this is new. Getting state, subscribing, and unsubscribing. In the next video, it'll take us quite a bit longer than this video, but in the next video, we are going to write a part of Redux. We're going to take a look at the source code, and we're going to look at get state, we're going to look at subscribe, we're going to look at unsub, we're going to look at create store. And we're going to figure out how all those things work internally so that whenever you do use Redux, whether it's with React Redux or when you're using it just by itself, we'll all understand it a little bit better. So that's the next video.